In the natural sciences, we use several ways of knowing in order to generate or identify lines of evidence for theories and hypotheses about our natural world. Although we must use all 8, even in the natural sciences, I would argue that there are a couple that we rely on much more: sense perception, reason, language, and memory. We use our senses to observe interactions and outcomes of investigations, reason to interpret and understand the results, and then language to communicate our findings. Memory, through written records, allows us to transmit this knowledge across generations. This allows for the advancement of scientific discoveries and tools. One gross misconception that we are repeatedly taught in our formal education is that there are only 5 human senses: sight, smell, hear, taste, and touch. However, we have additional senses that we are less conscious about. Take, for example, proprioception. We can sense where parts of our body are without having to look at them. We can coordinate motion of our body parts without watching them move. Close your eyes and touch your nose with your pointer finger. Not difficult, right? That's thanks to our invisible sense. There are more than just proprioception, though, that are just as beneficial to our survival.
Detecting gravity, detecting electromagnetic fields, maintaining balance, the stretching of muscle and skin, controlling breathing rate to maintain blood pH, controlling heart rate in response to physical activity, becoming more or less metabolically active depending on the surrounding temperature.
Some of our senses are more sensitive and/or in our faces than others. Some senses we lack, like visual perception of UV radiation, although our skin is able to do that just fine. So, we must design tools, technology, or apparatuses to detect that which we cannot. Take, for example, the microscope. This tool has undergone drastic changes since its conception in the late 1600s. In the 1590s, Hans and Zacharias Janssen were experimenting with curved lenses. By placing multiple and different lenses in series, they were able to magnify low-resolution images of objects. By 1595, they developed their first working microscope. The first objective lens magnified the image, and the second ocular lens magnified the first image. 70 years later, another Dutchman, Anton van Leeuwenhoek, built upon this model and achieved a magnifying power of 270 times and could view objects 1/1,000,000th of a meter. This feat led him to going down in history as the father of microscopy and microbiology. Although he did not invent the microscope, he made such significant improvements that he basically did. The compound microscope underwent many changes through the following centuries, though van Leeuwenhoek's basic design would persist in variants. The 1930s would bring significant improvements in apparatus. The German physicist Ernst Ruska, working with electrical engineer Max Knoll, developed the first prototype electron microscope in 1931, a transmission electron microscope. What created the demand for this advancement in technology, and how does it work? Light microscopes, like the compound microscopes we use in class, work well with light, but normally only magnify objects up to 1,000 times the actual size. As you increase in magnification, it becomes more difficult to get a clear resolution of the image, and this is limited by the wavelength of light. Transmission electron microscopes replace light with electrons, which have a wavelength 100,000 times smaller than light. To give you an idea of the scale in proportion, that would be like measuring an apple against Mount Everest. This much lower wavelength makes it possible to get a resolution 1,000 times better than with a light microscope and see objects 10 to the negative 10th meter in size. As electrons are fired through a vacuum at a prepared object, the manner in which they scatter or not creates a shadow image, generated by electromagnets. How has improving the microscope helped us, though? In the 1950s, organelles we endearingly learn about in biology class, like ribosomes, the ER, and lysosomes, were discovered thanks to improvements in the electron microscope. This is what we call the ultrastructure of cells. Structures in a biological specimen at least 0.1 nanometers in their smallest dimension. Light microscopes allow us to see the structure of cells, whereas electron microscopes allow us to see the ultrastructure. That's all interesting, but for this story, we need to begin a few hundred years back in time. Tulips are my absolute favorite type of flower because of their simplicity and strength in design, not just because of my Dutch heritage. Today, people associate tulips with the Netherlands. However, they originate from Turkey in the days of the Ottoman Empire. For an interesting history of this plant, I recommend The Botany of Desire by Michael Pollan. Euger Gieslen de Bousbecq, a Flemish author and ambassador for Austrian monarch Ferdinand I, sent tulip bulbs back to the European mainland in 1554. While in Vienna, renowned botanist Carolus Clusius met de Bousbecq, fell in love with the tulip, and wrote about this intoxicating plant in his 1576 book Rarium Aliquot Stirplum per Hispania's Observatorum. He loved them so much, he brought some bulbs from Bavaria first to Frankfurt am Main and then to Leiden around 1592. After distributing bulbs to his friends, the obsession to be known as tulip mania would begin. Tulip mania began around 1634 and took off in 1636 thanks in large part due to a particular variety of tulip named Semper Augustus. In this variety, Clusius was the first to describe breaking in 1576, where tulips developed streaks of different colors in the petals. These tulips, he observed, were weakened health-wise and had a limited future lifespan. However, this made Semper Augustus even more desired by people. The more stripes are breaking in a tulip, the more expensive it was. In 1636 to early 1637, essentially a trade war began between merchants. When I say war, I mean that the most expensive Semper Augustus bulb that sold, but was not yet created, was sold for a property spanning 5 hectares. One tulip, the Viceroy, acquired a value of 3,000 to 4,200 guilders. At the height of the craze, tulip bulbs cost people around 5,500 guilders, and the average yearly earnings of a Dutchman at the time was around 300 guilders. People were waging 10 plus years of earnings for a single flower bulb. That was going to eventually, but soon, die. Deliveries for these bulbs would never occur because in February 1637, the price of the tulip bulbs crashed, completely devaluing the plant. The tulip became the first bubble market in the world, and the economy of the Netherlands crashed. Interestingly enough, Clusius was onto something about the health status of the plants that experienced breaking. Several experiments beginning in 1928 by Dorothy Cayley at the John Innes Horticultural Institute in Norfolk, England, suggested breaking was caused by a virus or enzyme infection. It was supported by her colleague, McKenny Hughes, in 1930, who concluded through her research and experimentation that aphids were likely transmitting a virus to tulips, infecting them and causing this beautiful streaking in the petals. This was confirmed in the 1960s. The tulip breaking virus caused breaking using an electron microscope. The invention of the electron microscope has led to greater understanding of cell structure, and of subcellular structures like viruses all the way down to individual atoms. It could eventually aid researchers in nanomedicine, checking that a drug molecule is sufficiently attached to a nanoparticle, acting as a drug delivery vehicle. Each time an improvement is made in an apparatus, new data and evidence will be obtained and help to refine our understanding of the natural world. The world that we inhabit is limited by the world that we see. Is there any distinction to be drawn between knowledge claims dependent upon observations made by sense perception and knowledge claims dependent upon observations assisted by technology?